Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we've got a really exciting conversation because we're going to be talking about uniting the entire executive team from the board to the C-Suite on down around your ICP and the pitfalls of not getting your ICP right. We think a lot about getting it right, but we don't think always a lot about, well, what happens? What truly is the impact in the organization long term if we're not doing this in the correct way and we're not aligning behind it? So today we have on with us Rhiannon Staples. And Rhiannon, you're the CMO of GWI. And what I would love to do is have you expand on your background and specifically what you're doing at GWI right now, because I think it has a lot of relevance to what we're talking about today. But before we talk about that, I want to just plug you a little bit in terms of you're a multiple-time B2B CMO, right? You've worked across lots of industries, B2B SaaS, from HR to fintech and everything in between. So you've got a very broad perspective across industries in terms of what we're talking about here today. But before I take too much of the thunder, I want to turn it over to you and just maybe add a little bit to that in terms of your background and what you are doing at GWI today.
Yeah, I'm happy to. My wheelhouse, Steve, has really been in scale-up organizations that are looking to really expand market presence. And I found that this formula that we'll talk about with regard to ICP is, as you mentioned, relevant across verticals, but equally, I think, is the fuel that really helps organizations grow smart, grow efficiently, and grow quickly. I am the CMO right now of a company called GWI. We're a consumer research platform. We provide insights and intelligence on consumers for brands and corporates, information on demand to be able to really understand your buying audience. And so your messaging can be tailored accordingly. You can make sure that your audience, the messaging really lands well with your audience. And that really is so relevant to ICP, right? Whether that's consumers buying products like sneakers or in B2B, understanding your audience very well and making sure that the messaging that you're trying to get in front of them lands is really critical to everything we do here at GWI, but obviously as well in the B2B world.
And for everybody to know, this was like a Lucky Strike Extra, right? Because we first started talking about what did we want to talk about this episode? And I just said, what's your passion? And you immediately to the ICP, right? And that's probably why you ended up at a company that helps on this front. But if you could maybe start out by just telling us in your mind what the significance of the ICP is and why it's so important.
Yeah, maybe we'll define what ICP means first for anyone who's watching. IC what? All of the acronyms we love in B2B marketing.
Right.
Ideal customer profile, right? And I think that varies by the market you're in. And that certainly varies, I think, depending who you ask. What do we mean when we say ideal customer profile? I've definitely been in conversations where folks think about ICP as your persona. And for me, it's a little different than that. For me, your ideal customer profile in a B2B context, right, are the businesses that grow with your organization. And I think it's so critically important for businesses to think about ICP, not just as a go-to-market factor, sales and marketing and what you're focused on in terms of your go-to-market activities, but across the board, thinking about ideal customer profile and its impact on how it drives business growth, how it's adopted across all functions in the business, including product, customer success, et cetera.
There's a phenomenon that happens in a lot of companies. We've heard of the term like scope creep before, right? Well, there's something called ICP creep too, where I've talked to CMOs, they're like, we have 8 different ICPs and we have 15 different verticals. And you start thinking, oh my goodness, right away, right? There is a lack of focus that's going to happen as a result of that. When you think of an ICP and you think about, we definitely serve more than one master in our companies and who we're reaching out to. But in terms of getting focus around your ICP, how do you think about doing that?
Yeah, it starts with data. I suggest companies start with the end. Look at the companies that you close business with and the companies that renew. In a B2B SaaS world, it's all about ARR. We're the companies that stay with you and grow with you, and then look for the common denominators across those companies. People often think about ICP just in terms of maybe firmographic information, right? These geos, these verticals, but often there's additional nuance factors that really help you understand who within that big TAM in that specific vertical really is best suited for your business. And the data gives you some of those clues. So if you do a reverse analysis, you look at the companies that have grown with you, not the companies you're closing business with, but the companies that have stayed on for the long term and expand and are advocates for your business. Those are usually where you start to look for the clues to identify what the ideal customer profile is. Emphasis on ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we forget that the ones that stick around and buy again and expand, those are the ones that we want to emulate.
Absolutely.
It's tough because, especially with scale ups, but in every organization, we are always chasing a number.
Yeah.
We've always got this quarter's quota, the board's asking about how's it going, right? And how's next quarter going, right? And so there's always an impulse to hit and beat the number, minimally hit the number, beat the number. And so there's also a thought process of, well, let's expand a little bit. Let's not limit ourselves by who we're going after. So as much as we're trying to focus and define on those core companies that are at our heart of our ICP, the ones that will buy again and the net promoter score will recommend us and are the happiest, we have this tendency to grow beyond it and want to grow beyond it. What is your thought on that? And why is that good, that bad? What's your point of view?
Yeah. Nothing bad about taking business opportunistically that's available. I think organizations need to get really clear on what their ICP is and invest the majority of their resources there, right? Their sales resources, marketing resources, both financial and human, as I mentioned, thinking about the impact that those decisions have on customer success org, product org, et cetera. The additional opportunity to expand, I mean, naturally, you don't want to limit yourself, right? If there's other types of businesses that aren't necessarily a perfect ICP match, and you can do the proper evaluation and recognize that it doesn't throw off the balance in your business, absolutely. You shouldn't be walking away from business like that. But I think that's an important decision for leaders to take. Evaluating opportunities that are not a perfect match for your ICP and saying, is this telling us something about the market that maybe we can expand our ICP, right? Because you're right, you could feel like it's too limited long term. Those guerrilla campaigns can happen and you can find these other opportunities, but you just need to make sure that in closing them, bringing those customers on, that you're not derailing all of the other efforts, investments that you're making across the ICP. And I think that where that has the biggest impact, Steve, I'm sure we'll talk about it, is really on product development and making sure that your organization continues to develop product that really serves the majority of your customers, not the minority. And a lot of businesses make that mistake in chasing the number. They'll take on business that maybe isn't necessarily healthy for the long-term growth of the business, for that short-term gain.
That long-term ROI is what you're getting at here. You used the term, it's sexy to go after the whales, right? The big wins and everything. Tell us a little bit about the impact on the organization if you try to go after those shiny objects and what that impact truly is.
Yeah. Listen, it takes a lot of discipline to walk away from that. But if it hurts the long-term strategic vision for the business and where the business is growing, it could be really detrimental. So we've all been a part of a business, growing business. You've got numbers to hit, as you mentioned, for your revenue projections, your board commitments. But you close that one deal, and perhaps there's promises you make in that deal closure for product development that just does not support the 95%, the rest of the 95% of your customer base. Long term, that can have some really negative impacts. At best, that particular customer just churns after a year or two when they realize that the product isn't developing in the direction that they need it to. So oftentimes when you force that in, you force that fit just for the revenue number that first year of sales, you could be really just misdirecting a lot of development resources in the business. It also sends a message to your frontline teams, to your go-to-market teams that, okay, so we can go after these big whale opportunities and we're going to allow that to guide our product roadmap and our strategic development of the business, which is obviously very unhealthy long-term.
So, every company should be focusing 30, 40% of new revenue from existing customers. And so to your point, if your long-term roadmap and your product development strategy is not focused on expanding existing client relationships, right? And we're focusing on these shiny objects, these whales, and it's misdirecting our product development strategy. It's therefore misdirecting our resources, how we're training people individually, how we're selling against that product, everything, right? It has a complete ripple effect on everything. What you're saying, my takeaway here is that you're doing yourself an injustice to take on what can be very, very enticing to make this quarter's number, right? when we even know innately that this isn't the right fit and it's not going to direct us long term, we're not going to be able to support it as well long term. Tell me about some of the internal conversations and how do you talk internally about what's the balance? Because sometimes, especially with scale ups, oh my goodness, do we need that money? Right? Do we need that revenue coming in? How do you handle that internally in the conversations amongst the C-suite?
Yeah. As I mentioned, data definitely provides a lot of support there. Starting with that, because you take all of opinions off the table and you're now using information that comes from your own data to make those decisions. I think it's really important to be clear on what the long-term strategic objectives are of the business. That starts in the C-suite. So if we're not aligned on that, we're not clear on where we want to take the company, it's going to be very difficult to stay true to that ICP match. I think there's also a conversation to be had, as we started to talk about earlier in the conversation. There's a discussion to be had about how you complement opportunistic deals. This isn't to say that you can only close deals in your ICP, because that's not the case at all. But what is the decisioning criteria we're going to use to evaluate those enticing opportunities to make a decision about whether or not to take on new clients that don't necessarily fall within our perfect, ideal customer profile, and understand how that might map to the longer term strategic goals for the business. If it feels completely out of left field, then naturally it doesn't make sense. But if it feels like it's all along the path, maybe a little bit early, or maybe an opportunity we hadn't thought about, but we can find some parallels to your ICP, and it could make a lot of sense. But it really is about being very clear on the future and also knowing where you've come from. And that's what the existing data will tell you.
And most companies have an evolution. Who you're serving as a true startup, scale up, and who you end up serving ultimately are very different. And usually along the way, there's a conversation about we need to upscale the kind of clients we're
Always,
getting,
always.
right? Right. So nothing that you're saying here is saying that testing the waters and having an objective to change your ICP over time that's a good thing, right? But its impact internally along the way has to be really thought through. And the C-suite is the one that's got to do that. And the CMO needs to be a really strong voice of authority in that, because you're managing the expertise of the company, how we're perceived as a company, our trusted advisor status as a company, right? It's creating that for a specific ICP, right? And
Yep.
as we evolve, we just have to be very careful about that. In fact, there was a woman on that was a 3-time B2B CMO, and she said, Steve, today's brand is tomorrow's demand. Absolutely. What a brilliant way to say that so succinctly. And she said, and if done correctly, it'll actually take away cycles in the sales process because of the expertise, the trusted advisor status that we've created as an organization, that the sales team doesn't actually have to spend as much time proving themselves and what they know, right? So this has tremendous impact across the board. But I guess my question to you here is, you've talked about walking away from certain opportunities, strategically growing, but what are the common mistakes and the pitfalls along this journey that as a CMO, we need to know about, we need to watch out for, we need to help guide and align the organization behind? What are the common mistakes that we just don't want to keep running our head against the wall on?
Yeah. We've touched on a few of these. One is it doesn't just belong to marketing. People love to think that ICP it's just a marketing tactic. It just decides where your marketing dollars are spent. And it's so much more than that. It is strategic direction in the business, first and foremost. The second, also another point we've touched on, is it's the only marketing you're doing or the only focus that you can't, it's rigid. There's no gray area around it, which is far from the truth. We've talked about where you make exceptions and you start to bend and flex the ICP, particularly as you pointed out, if you're looking to push upstream, which so many scaled businesses do. It's going to change over time. So knowing where you're going, the strategic direction is tied directly to it. I think the other thing is making sure that the business is aligned on what we mean by our ICP and being as specific as possible, because people like to speak about it in big general terms. It's this vertical or it's these types of companies without great specificity. So I think the role that the CMO really plays is helping the business lock in on, okay, let's be really specific. What are the common denominators across these companies? Firmographic information is one thing, but what are some of the subtle nuances about these businesses, the way they're structured, the way they operate, the way they present their brand to the market that can tell us and help us understand if they're a good ICP match? The marketing lead's role is really helping the business understand that. And then within that, recognizing it's not just one unified position you have to go into that ICP with. Again, in my definition, ICP is the company we're going after. You've got a lot of different personas and influencers in that B2B sale that you need to be speaking to and presenting your brand to. So thinking about how the positioning is tailored towards each of those different stakeholders in the process is a critical part. So it's a bit layered, right? It's thinking about the strategic ICP, but then within that, who the individuals are that we need to reach in that account and how we reach them, what motivates them.
So you just opened up a really big can of good worms right here. If we go back even 10, 15 years ago, the size of the buying committee inside of these organizations was a third to a fourth of the size that it is today. So when you talk about those different layers of decision making that are happening within the organization and the different personas underneath the company and the ICP that you're talking about, tell us a little bit about how you learn, right? We can have a buying committee now that's easily 10, 15 people. And we might be talking to what we call the champion, right? The doorway in here. How do you think about then the personas within that buying committee, and how do we understand them and how do we reach them?
Yeah. Research is the short answer to that very long question. And as is the answer to most questions I'm asked, you start at the end. Understanding your buyer, understanding the committee that they're a part of, understanding who influences that decision. You can often get that information, certainly directly from your customers, right? Going back to the champions, start with the source. If you know who your ICP are and you've got customers that are big advocates for your brand, start by understanding what their experience was like, what their experience is in their organizations. Complement that with feedback and intelligence from your revenue organization. They've got their ears to the ground. They're interacting with these teams every day. They understand who the folks are that are getting brought into these buying committees. Every question that they're asking of them and some of the challenges that are being presented to your sellers, all of that's an important inputs to collect. Then go forward and think about how you overcome each of those individual concerns or objections. How do you complement the intelligence that you're getting from the field and from the ground with inside knowledge about the competitive space, about the business challenges, et cetera, to be able to help your sales team and your marketing team address some of those perceptions or beliefs head on.
If you do that really well, it's a very little used term, but we have bigger terms that we all know are like sales enablement from marketing, right? Like how are we enabling that sales process? But then if we think about that, maybe our champion has their internal audiences that they're trying to influence. We've all had conversations with our champions. They love it. And they're like, okay, where are the biggest hurdles internally? What do you need in order to address IT, procurement, right? If we think in terms of enabling them in the same way that we enable our own internal sales teams, because these people aren't professional buyers. They've got their regular job, right? Think of the last time that you bought some tech for your MarTech stack, right? What percentage of your job was buying that particular technology? Very small. So they're not professionals at it, right? And they need our help in all kinds of ways. So I love the way that you're thinking about the different layers and the different personas inside, and how do we understand them, and how do we collect all of that knowledge basically to enable them to sell internally and guide them through that process.
Yeah,
And
but they call them champions for a reason, right? They have a pain that they're trying to solve or an opportunity they're trying to take advantage of. They know their internal audience better than you do. So understand what it is, what are the challenges they're facing internally, and just ask the right questions to really get at the root of what they have to overcome internally, and then make sure you've got the resources at the ready to be able to overcome that. And whenever possible, obviously, asking for access to those stakeholders yourself so that they don't have to do the selling on your behalf, but you have the chance to meet those questions and objections directly head on.
Yeah, and in fact, something we didn't even talk about before, but so important these days is the experience as a competitive advantage, like the CX as a competitive advantage for organizations. In a day and age of technology and product feature and benefits are no longer a sustainable long-term competitive advantage for most companies. When you've got 20, 15, 20 different competitors out there and AI is writing code and all kinds of good stuff. So the idea here, though, is what you're talking about is helping them. So if the experience with you as an organization that's selling actually starts, not only even with the first sales conversation, but prior to that, anything that you can do to make it easy for them to make a decision, right?
That's
That's,
absolutely our job as marketers, without a doubt.
I love that. Tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking here, because this is an area that we don't talk enough about in marketing and sales.
Yeah, our job isn't to sell. Our job is to enable. We're not there to just push a product. We're there to solve a problem from our customer's point of view. I approach every conversation. What does the customer think? Let's take ourselves out of our marketer or seller shoes, out of our B2B tech shoes. Like, what is it like, as you started to say, to be on the other end of that? If you're not a professional buyer, what are the things that you're going to be thinking about that are going to lead you to go out and try and find a solution in the first place? I think about the role of marketing. How do we help you along that journey? We know today, good 80% of the research is done before that company ever ends up on most companies' radar screens. That prospect ever ends up on most companies' radar screens. So the best performing companies are not the ones that are just trying to push product. And this is, let me tell you what we can do for you, but to demonstrate empathy and understanding and help enable. We view our prospect as the hero of the story. And what are the tools that you're providing them with to make them look like the hero in their business? That's ultimately what we have to do as marketers and sellers at the end of the day, because that's what a successful relationship looks like.
And that relationship is, you cannot underscore the importance of, you just made it easy for me, right? They've got so much to do, so much on their plate. Obviously, the product has to do everything that you say it is. But I was talking to a chief customer officer a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this idea of CX as a competitive advantage. He said, let me give you an example. He said, I was just talking to one of our customers, a chief compliance officer, and he had just gone through a buying process and decision making, had about 15 different competitors that he was looking at. And this chief customer officer said, well, how did you make that decision? And he said, I want to know what the experience is going to be like working with them after the fact, right? The platforms that were being offered, the features, the benefits, all had to meet a minimum requirement, absolutely, for sure. And there were some advantages there. He said, but there's a lot of promises that are made, but it's actually working with them as a company and what that experience is like. If we understand that, that's what I'm hearing loud and clear from you, is we have to enable them. We have to understand, and actually, if we can give them a little bit, a slice of what it's like to work with us before you actually make the decision to work with us, that we just make it easy. We help you accomplish what you need to accomplish, whether that's core directly to what we offer in our product and our tech, but we're looking at the bigger picture and helping. That's a consultant role, right?
Yeah, it's a huge contributing factor to the companies that stay and grow with you. So, bringing it back to ICP. So let's marry that now to where the conversation started. If you're closing deals, closing accounts that are not a good match for your ICP in an area of the business or business area that maybe your CX team doesn't understand particularly well, they're not able to bring experience from similar circumstances in other businesses to that engagement. They're not able to share knowledge and information to help that new customer be successful. That relationship isn't going to be as rich. It's not going to be as sticky. It's not going to expand. So this is why that ICP definition is so clear. Think about yourself as a CX leader. What if you were managing 10 different accounts, all with a very different profile? How do you add value to any of those accounts? So much of the value we bring, Steve, you and I have talked about this, is information sharing across companies and practices. If you're not focused on your ICP, it dilutes even that experience.
Absolutely. With our limited time left here, there's a couple of questions I still want to ask. You've been doing this for a long time and you've had a lot of challenges, you've had a lot of wins. What is something that you're most proud of that you've been able to accomplish?
Again, I think maybe why this topic resonated so strongly with me when you and I started to talk about this, having been part of a company in the past where the leadership team was tightly aligned on ICP and seeing how fast that drove our engine, like something to be really excited about. I'd say all the time, obviously, a lot of that past experience can be attributed to marketing. We did a brilliant job, but it was 10 times more powerful because it was aligned to what we were doing across our product team, across our customer success team, across our sales organization, and being able to take a business through multiple stages of growth and into multiple global markets is just a really exciting experience. And I attribute so much of that to really tight focus on what was a good match for the business.
So, with that, and with everything else that you've said here today, if there was one single thing that you wanted us to take away, as marketers, we know we can't load the brain up with too much, right? So if we just focus it down and say, if you're going to remember anything from my conversation here today, here's what I want you to take away. What would it be?
Yeah. Your job as the CMO is to help the business understand that the ideal customer profile focus is critical to the strategic long-term vision for the business. It's not just about go to market. We have the opportunity to help the business really define what that is, get true to it, and help rally the business behind that ICP.
I love it. I love it. And if there are folks that have more questions for you, is it appropriate that we maybe give out your link to your LinkedIn profile so people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Talk about this all day long. Love to jazz about this with other marketing folks.
And I know you could talk about it all day long because we've had some pretty good conversations. So, Rhiannon, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights and perspectives and giving us even more motivation. We all know the ICP is important, but giving us motivation for really how foundational it is and how much we really need to work on it and think about it in order to create that long-term success. So I just appreciate all your feedback today. I really do.
Great talking with you, Steve. Thank you.